The moving truck pulled away from the apartment complex, leaving behind a trail of dust and the overwhelming silence that comes after a big change. Maya stood in the doorway of her new home, apartment 3B, holding a single cardboard box labeled Kitchen Essentials in her tired arms. At 24, she had moved more times than she cared to count, but this felt different. This was supposed to be her fresh start. The apartment complex wasn't much to look at. 3 stories of beige brick, with narrow hallways that smelled faintly of cleaning products and old carpet. But the rent was something she could actually afford on her nursing student budget, and it was only 15 minutes from both the community college and the coffee shop where she worked part-time. In her world, those 2 things made it perfect. Maya pushed open her apartment door and stepped inside. The place was small but clean, with enough space for her bed, a tiny table, and maybe a bookshelf if she was lucky. She set the box down on the kitchen counter and looked around. Home sweet home, she thought, trying to feel excited rather than overwhelmed. As she walked back to her car to grab more boxes, she noticed an older man struggling with grocery bags near the apartment next to hers. He looked to be in his late 70s with silver hair that needed a trim and clothes that had seen better days. One of his plastic bags had torn and canned goods were rolling across the concrete walkway. Without thinking, Maya jogged over. "Hey, let me help you with those," she said, bending down to collect the escaped cans of soup. The man looked up at her with sharp, dark eyes that seemed surprised by her offer. "I can manage," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't quite place. But even as he spoke, another can slipped from his overloaded arms. "I know you can," Maya said with a smile, gathering the remaining cans. "But my mom always told me that just because you can do something alone doesn't mean you should have to." He studied her face for a moment, as if trying to figure out what she wanted from him. Maya had seen that look before. It was the expression of someone who had learned to be cautious about kindness, someone who had been disappointed before. "I'm Maya," she said, standing up with an armful of canned goods. "I just moved in next door. Apartment 3B. "Walter," he replied after a pause. 3A. Maya noticed his hands shaking slightly as he fumbled with his keys. The grocery bags looked heavy for someone his age, and she could see him breathing a little harder than normal. "Walter, would it be okay if I helped you carry these inside? I promise I'm not trying to case the joint or anything. I'm just a broke nursing student who was raised to help her neighbors." Something in her tone must have convinced him because Walter nodded slowly. "All right, but just to the door." As they walked the few steps to his apartment, Maya noticed how carefully he moved, like someone who had learned not to trust his body completely. His apartment key took him several tries to work, his hands still trembling slightly. "Are you feeling okay?" Maya asked gently. "You seem a little shaky." Walter paused at his door. "Just tired. It's been a long day." Maya didn't push. She helped him get the groceries inside his apartment, which was neat but felt somehow empty. The furniture looked like it belonged to an earlier decade, and there were spaces on the walls where pictures had obviously hung before. It felt like the home of someone who was just going through the motions of living. "Thank you," Walter said, clearly hoping she would leave now. "No problem at all," Maya replied. "Hey, if you ever need help with groceries or anything, I'm right next door. I know what it's like to be new somewhere and not know anyone." Walter looked at her again with those careful eyes. "You don't need to worry about me." "I know I don't need to," Maya said. "But neighbors should look out for each other, right?" Over the next few days, Maya noticed things about Walter that made her worry. She would see him from her kitchen window, moving slowly around the parking lot, sometimes stopping to rest against cars. His grocery trip seemed to exhaust him, and she never saw any visitors at his apartment. No friends stopping by, no family members checking in. Maya's own days were busy. She had classes 3 days a week, worked at the coffee shop 4 days a week, and spent most of her free time studying or doing homework. But she found herself listening for sounds from Walter's apartment, just to make sure he was okay. One morning, as she was leaving for her early shift at the coffee shop, she heard a crash from next door. Maya knocked on Walter's door, calling out, "Walter, are you okay in there?" After a moment, the door opened. Walter stood there looking embarrassed with broken pieces of a coffee mug at his feet. "Just clumsy," he said quickly. "Nothing to worry about." But Maya could see the frustration in his eyes, the kind that comes from a body that doesn't cooperate the way it used to. "Would you like me to help clean that up?" "I've got a few minutes before work." Walter hesitated, then stepped aside. As Maya swept up the broken pieces, she noticed other small signs that Walter was struggling. Mail piled up on his counter like he had trouble getting to the mailbox regularly. Dishes in the sink that suggested he was living on simple, easy meals. Medication bottles lined up on the kitchen counter more than most people his age should need. "Walter," Maya said carefully as she threw away the broken mug pieces, "have you been feeling okay lately? I don't mean to pry, but you seem like you might be having some tough days." Walter sat down heavily in his kitchen chair. For a moment, Maya thought he was going to ask her to leave. Instead, he looked out his window and said quietly, "Getting old isn't for the weak." "No," Maya agreed. "But it doesn't have to be done alone." That afternoon, when Maya got home from classes, she knocked on Walter's door again. This time she was carrying a container of homemade soup. "I made too much," she lied smoothly. "Would you like some? It's just chicken and vegetables, nothing fancy." Walter opened the door and looked at the container, then at Maya's face. Whatever he saw there must have convinced him that she wasn't going anywhere, because he finally invited her in. They sat at his small kitchen table, sharing soup and talking about simple things. Maya learned that Walter had been an engineer, that he had lived in the apartment for 8 years, and that his wife had passed away 3 years ago. He didn't volunteer much information, but Maya was a good listener, and slowly Walter began to talk. As the sun set outside Walter's kitchen window, Maya realized something had shifted between them. She wasn't just the helpful neighbor anymore. She was becoming his friend, and something told her that Walter needed a friend more than he was willing to admit. When she finally got up to leave, Walter walked her to the door. "Thank you for the soup," he said, "and for cleaning up my mess this morning." "That's what neighbors do," Maya replied. "See you tomorrow, Walter." As she walked back to her own apartment, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that Walter was carrying some kind of sadness that went deeper than just missing his wife. There was something in his eyes when he talked about his past, a regret that seemed to weigh on him. But whatever it was, Maya was determined to be the kind of neighbor Walter deserved. Everyone needed someone who cared, and it was clear that Walter had been alone for far too long. 3 weeks had passed since Maya first helped Walter with his groceries, and their friendship had settled into a comfortable routine. Every morning before her shift at the coffee shop, Maya would knock on Walter's door with a simple "good morning" and a quick check to see if he needed anything. Every evening after her classes, she would stop by again, usually with some excuse about having extra food or needing to borrow something. Walter had stopped pretending he didn't appreciate the company. On this particular Tuesday morning, Maya found Walter sitting at his kitchen table with what looked like a complicated pill organizer spread out in front of him. Different colored bottles were scattered around, and he was squinting at tiny labels through reading glasses that had seen better days. "This is ridiculous," Walter muttered as Maya let herself in. He had given her a spare key the week before, claiming it was just in case of emergencies, but they both knew it was because he enjoyed having someone to talk to. "What's going on?" Maya asked, setting down her backpack and looking at the medication chaos. "Doctor added 2 new pills to my routine," Walter said, holding up a prescription bottle. "Now I can't remember which ones I take in the morning and which ones are for evening. And this one says to take with food, but this other one says on an empty stomach. How am I supposed to manage that?" Maya pulled up a chair next to him. As a nursing student, she knew how confusing medication schedules could be, especially for older patients managing multiple conditions. "Mind if I help you sort this out?" For the next hour, Maya helped Walter organize his medications into a proper weekly pill organizer. She made him a simple chart showing exactly when to take each pill and whether it needed food or not. Walter watched her work with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. "You're going to make a good nurse," he said as Maya labeled the last day of the week. "I hope so," Maya replied. "I've got 2 more years of school left, assuming I can keep paying for it." Walter looked at her more closely. "Money troubles?" Maya shrugged, trying to keep her tone light. "Just the usual student stuff. Work part-time, take classes, try not to live on instant noodles every day. The American dream, right?" She didn't mention that she had already put off taking her advanced chemistry class because she couldn't afford the lab fees this semester, or that she sometimes skipped lunch so she could buy the textbooks she needed. Walter didn't need to worry about her problems, but Walter was more observant than Maya realized. Over the following days, he started noticing things. like how Maya would sometimes come over right around dinner time but would politely decline when he offered food, claiming she had already eaten, or how she wore the same 3 shirts to work in rotation, washing them carefully each week, or how she would study by the light coming through her kitchen window instead of turning on lamps. One evening, when Maya stopped by after an especially long day of classes and work, Walter was ready for her. "Sit down," he said as soon as she walked in. "I made too much food again." The smell coming from Walter's kitchen was incredible. Real cooking smells, not the microwave dinners Maya had gotten used to. Her stomach growled loudly enough that they both heard it. "Walter, you don't need to cook for me," Maya protested, but she was already sitting down at his table. "Helen always said the best way to show someone you care is to feed them properly," Walter said, setting a plate of homemade lasagna in front of her. "Besides, cooking for one person is depressing. You're doing me a favor." As Maya ate, Walter told her about his late wife. Helen had been a teacher at the local elementary school for 30 years. She loved to cook, loved to have people over for dinner, loved to take care of everyone around her. Their apartment had always been full of friends and neighbors and the smell of something delicious in the oven. "She would have liked you," Walter said, refilling Maya's water glass. "Helen always said you could tell a person's character by how they treat people who can't do anything for them in return." Maya felt tears start to form in her eyes. "She sounds like she was an amazing woman." "She was," Walter said simply. 52 years of marriage, and I still miss her voice in the morning." Over dinner, Maya learned more about Walter's life. He had worked as a mechanical engineer for several aerospace companies, helping design parts for satellites and space equipment. He was incredibly smart, Maya realized, as he explained complex engineering concepts in ways that made perfect sense. When she mentioned struggling with the science requirements for her nursing program, Walter offered to help. "Physics and chemistry are just different ways of understanding how the world works," he said. "If you can understand how the human body works, you can understand anything." From that night forward, their evening routine expanded. Maya would come over after classes, and Walter would help her with homework while they shared dinner. He was a patient teacher, breaking down complicated formulas and theories into simple, logical steps. Maya's grades started improving almost immediately, but it wasn't just one-sided help. Maya noticed that Walter seemed more energetic, more engaged with life since they had been spending time together. He started dressing more carefully, keeping his apartment tidier, even humming while he cooked. Having someone to care for again seemed to be bringing him back to life. One evening, as Walter helped Maya understand molecular structures for her chemistry class, she noticed him looking at a photograph on his bookshelf. It was an older picture of Walter and Helen, but there was a third person in it, a young man who looked like he might be in his 20s. "Is that your son?" Maya asked gently. Walter's expression changed immediately. The warmth in his eyes dimmed, and his shoulders seemed to slump a little. "David," he said quietly. "That picture's about 15 years old. Does he live nearby?" Maya asked. Walter stood up and moved the photograph so it wasn't facing them. "David lives in California. He's very busy with his own life." There was something in Walter's tone that told Maya this was painful territory. She had learned to read Walter's moods over the past few weeks, and this was definitely a subject that hurt him. "Do you talk to him often?" She pressed gently. "No," Walter said, sitting back down but not meeting her eyes. We don't really keep in touch anymore." Maya wanted to ask more questions, but Walter had picked up her textbook again and was clearly trying to change the subject. She decided not to push, but she couldn't help wondering what had happened between Walter and his son. Walter was such a kind, caring person. What could have gone wrong? Over the next few days, Maya found herself thinking about Walter's son often. She noticed that Walter never got phone calls, never mentioned anyone visiting, never talked about having plans with family. For someone who had obviously been a loving husband and seemed like he would be a wonderful father, Walter was remarkably alone in the world. One morning, Maya arrived to find Walter looking particularly tired. He had dark circles under his eyes and seemed to be moving more slowly than usual. "Rough night?" she asked. Walter waved off her concern. "Just couldn't sleep. Old man problems." But Maya had learned to pay attention to the things Walter didn't say. As she helped him organize his morning medications, she noticed his hands were shaking more than usual. When he thought she wasn't looking, she saw him press his hand to his chest briefly like something hurt. "Walter," Maya said carefully, "when was your last doctor's appointment?" "Few months ago." Walter said quickly. I'm fine, Maya, don't worry about me. But Maya was worried. And as she left for work that morning, she couldn't shake the feeling that Walter needed more help than he was willing to admit. She also couldn't stop thinking about his son David, living in California, having no idea that his father was getting older and more fragile every day. Something told Maya that Walter's family situation was more complicated than just a busy son who didn't call often. There was real pain in Walter's eyes when he talked about David, the kind of pain that comes from broken relationships and words that can't be taken back. Maya didn't know what had happened between Walter and his son, but she was beginning to understand that Walter's loneliness went much deeper than just missing his wife. He was missing his child too, and that kind of heartbreak was something Maya wasn't sure how to fix. Maya's curiosity about Walter's son had been growing for weeks, but she tried her best to respect his privacy. That changed on a rainy Thursday evening when she found Walter sitting in his kitchen, staring at an old shoebox filled with photographs and papers. Sorry, Maya said, starting to back out. I can come back later if you want to be alone. No, stay, Walter said, his voice heavy with emotion. I was just looking through some old things. Sometimes the memories feel too big to carry alone. Maya sat down across from him and saw that the photographs spread across the table were all of the same young man she had seen in the picture on his bookshelf. But these photos showed the progression of a life. A little boy missing his front teeth, a teenager in a graduation cap, a young man in his 20s looking serious and determined. That's David, Walter said, picking up one of the photos. He was such a bright kid. Always asking questions, always taking things apart to see how they worked. Helen used to joke that we should buy stock in whatever company made screwdrivers because David went through so many of them. Maya could hear the love in Walter's voice, but also a deep sadness that made her heart ache. He sounds like he was a lot like you. Maybe too much like me, Walter said with a bitter laugh. Stubborn. Determined to do things his own way no matter what anyone else thought. Walter picked up another photo, this one showing David in a cap and gown at what looked like a college graduation. David was incredibly smart. Full scholarship to MIT for engineering. Helen and I were so proud. We thought he was going to follow in my footsteps, maybe even surpass what I had accomplished. What happened? Maya asked gently. Walter's face darkened. 2 years into his degree, David came home for Christmas and announced he was dropping out. Said he had this idea for some kind of computer business. This was back when most people barely knew what the internet was, you understand? To me, it sounded like complete nonsense. Maya waited, sensing there was more to the story. I told him he was throwing his life away. Walter continued, his voice getting quieter. I said he was being irresponsible, that he needed to finish school and get a real job. Helen tried to support him, but I was so angry. Here we had sacrificed so much to give him opportunities I never had, and he wanted to waste it all on some crazy dream. Walter stood up and walked to his kitchen window, looking out at the rain. The fight we had that Christmas was terrible. I said things I shouldn't have said. David said things too. He left the next morning and barely spoke to us for 2 years. But surely you worked things out eventually, Maya asked. Helen did, Walter said. She kept in touch with David, visited him a few times when he moved to California. She said he was doing well with his business, but I was too proud to admit I might have been wrong. I kept waiting for him to come crawling back, to admit that I'd been right about finishing school. Walter returned to his chair and picked up another photo, this one showing David a bit older, standing next to an older woman Maya recognized as Helen. Both of them were smiling, but Walter wasn't in the picture. By the time Helen got sick, David was doing very well for himself. He flew out immediately when we called to tell him about her. Cancer. He stayed for 2 weeks, took care of both of us really. But there was this distance between us that we couldn't seem to bridge. Maya could see tears starting to form in Walter's eyes. He paid for all of Helen's medical treatments. Every single bill. He never said anything about it, just quietly made sure we never had to worry about money during that time. But I was too stubborn to thank him properly. Too proud to admit that maybe his crazy computer idea hadn't been so crazy after all. What happened after Helen passed away? Maya asked. David tried. Walter said simply. He called several times, invited me to come visit him in California. But every conversation felt awkward. We didn't know how to talk to each other anymore. I kept thinking about all the years we had lost, all the things I should have said but didn't. Eventually, he stopped calling. I figured he had given up on his stubborn old father. Walter pulled out a newspaper clipping from the bottom of the box. It was yellowed and worn from being handled many times. Maya could see it was from the business section of a newspaper, but the text was too faded to read clearly. "I found this in Helen's things after she died," Walter said. She had been keeping track of David's success all these years, even when I was too proud to ask. This article mentioned something about David's company doing well, but I could never quite make out all the details. Maya leaned closer to look at the clipping, but Walter folded it up quickly and put it back in the box. "The point is," Walter continued, "David has built a life for himself. A successful life, and I'm just a lonely old man who wasn't smart enough to support his son's dreams when it mattered. He's probably better off without me." "Walter, that's not true," Maya said firmly. "You made a mistake, but parents and children fight sometimes. That doesn't mean the love goes away." "It's been 3 years since Helen's funeral," Walter said. "If David wanted me in his life, he would have called by now." Maya spent the rest of the evening listening to Walter share more memories of David. Stories about teaching him to ride a bike, helping him with science projects, watching him graduate high school as valedictorian. It was clear that Walter loved his son deeply and regretted the rift between them more than anything else in his life. As Maya walked back to her own apartment that night, she couldn't stop thinking about the situation. Here was Walter, such a kind and caring man, convinced that his son wanted nothing to do with him. And somewhere in California was David, who had apparently been successful enough to pay for his mother's medical care without question, but who had stopped reaching out to his father. Maya had seen this kind of stubborn standoff before. Her own father had gone years without speaking to his brother over a much smaller disagreement. Sometimes people who love each other the most are the worst at swallowing their pride and making the first move. Over the next few days, Maya found herself wondering more and more about David Chen. Walter had mentioned he worked with computers and lived in California, but that was about all she knew. The old newspaper clipping suggested he had been successful, but Walter seemed to have no idea just how well David was actually doing. Maya's curiosity finally got the better of her on a Saturday afternoon when she was supposed to be studying for her anatomy exam. Instead, she found herself opening her laptop and typing "David Chen California Business" into a search engine. What she found made her heart stop. The first result was a recent magazine article, with a photo that was definitely the same David from Walter's pictures, just older. But the headline made Maya's hands shake as she read it. "Tech mogul David Chen's revolutionary medical devices change healthcare industry." Maya clicked on the article and began reading. David Chen wasn't just successful. He was the founder and CEO of a company that had developed groundbreaking medical technology. The article mentioned that his company had recently gone public, and that David's personal net worth was estimated at over $2 billion. $2 billion. Maya stared at her laptop screen in shock. Walter's son wasn't just doing well, he was one of the wealthiest people in the country. And here was Walter, worried about grocery money and living in a modest apartment, completely unaware that his son could probably buy the entire apartment complex without thinking twice about it. But as Maya read further, she found something even more interesting. Near the end of the article, David was quoted talking about his inspiration for getting into medical technology. He mentioned growing up with a father who was an engineer and a mother who dedicated her life to helping others. He said his goal was to combine his father's technical expertise with his mother's compassion to create devices that could save lives. Maya realized that David hadn't forgotten his parents at all. In fact, it sounded like they were still the driving force behind everything he did. So why hadn't he reached out to Walter? And more importantly, what was Maya supposed to do with this information? Maya couldn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the magazine article about David Chen and his billions of dollars. She kept thinking about Walter, sitting alone in his apartment, convinced his son had moved on without him. The whole situation felt like a cruel joke that nobody was in on. For 3 days, Maya carried the weight of her discovery like a secret that was burning a hole in her chest. She went through her normal routine, checking on Walter in the mornings, going to work, attending classes, helping him with dinner in the evenings. But the whole time, she felt like she was lying to him. During their Tuesday evening study session, Maya found herself watching Walter more carefully than usual. He was helping her understand respiratory systems for her anatomy class, drawing simple diagrams on scrap paper and explaining how oxygen moved through the body. His hands were steady and sure as he drew, his voice patient as he broke down complex processes into terms she could understand. "You're a really good teacher," Maya said suddenly. "David was lucky to have you help him with his homework when he was growing up." Walter's pencil stopped moving. "I don't know about that. If I had been better at understanding what he wanted to do with his life, maybe things would be different now." Maya took a deep breath. "Walter, what if David isn't as far away as you think he is?" "What do you mean?" Maya had been rehearsing this conversation in her head for days, but now that the moment was here, she didn't know how to begin. "I mean, what if the reason he hasn't called isn't because he doesn't want you in his life? What if he's just as stubborn as you are?" Walter set down his pencil and looked at her carefully. "Maya, what aren't you telling me?" The directness of his question caught Maya off guard. She had forgotten how perceptive Walter could be, especially when it came to reading people's emotions. "I did something I probably shouldn't have done," Maya admitted. "I was curious about David, so I looked him up online." Walter's expression changed immediately. "You what?" "I know I should have asked first, but I was worried about you. You talk about David like he's some distant memory. But Walter, he's not. He's very much alive and very much successful." Walter stood up from the table, his face a mixture of anger and confusion. "Maya, you had no right to go searching for information about my family." "You're right," Maya said quickly. "I'm sorry. But Walter, I think you need to know what I found." "I don't want to hear it," Walter said, starting to pace around his small kitchen. "David has his life and I have mine. That's how it is." But Maya could see the curiosity in his eyes even as he protested. She pulled out her phone and showed him the magazine article she had found. Walter looked at the screen for a long moment, his face going through a series of emotions. First recognition as he saw David's face, then confusion as he tried to read the headline, then complete shock as the words sank in. "This can't be right," Walter said, sitting down heavily. $2 billion? That's impossible." Maya sat next to him and began reading parts of the article aloud. As she read, Walter's expression shifted from disbelief to amazement to something that looked almost like pride. "He really did it," Walter whispered when Maya finished. "His crazy computer idea really worked." "Walter, there's more," Maya said gently. She showed him another article she had found, this one about David's charitable foundation. "Look at this. He started a foundation for medical research and senior care. It's called the Helen Chen Foundation." Walter's eyes filled with tears as he read about the foundation named after his late wife. The foundation had donated millions of dollars to hospitals and senior living facilities across the country. Maya watched Walter's face as he realized that his son had been honoring Helen's memory in a way that would have made her incredibly proud. "He named it after her," Walter said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's something else," Maya said. She had spent hours reading everything she could find about David Chen, and one interview had particularly caught her attention. In this interview from last year, the reporter asked David about his family. He said his biggest regret was the distance from his father, and that he wished he could find a way to repair their relationship. Walter looked up at Maya with red-rimmed eyes. "He said that?" "He said he thinks about you all the time. He said you taught him everything he knows about problem-solving and engineering, and that every success he's had is built on the foundation you gave him." Walter buried his face in his hands.
"Oh, Maya, what have I done?"
"All these years, I thought he was angry with me. I thought he blamed me for not supporting his dreams." "Walter, I think you both made the same mistake," Maya said softly. "You both assumed the other person didn't want to make contact. But it sounds like you've both been waiting for the other one to make the first move." Walter was quiet for a long time, processing everything Maya had shown him. Finally, he looked up at her with a mixture of hope and terror in his eyes. "What if he really doesn't want to hear from me?" Walter asked. "What if I call him and he hangs up?" "What if you don't call him and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have happened?" Maya replied. That night, Maya lay awake thinking about the conversation with Walter. She had given him David's business phone number, which she had found on his company's website, but she could tell Walter was terrified of making that call. After years of silence, reaching out to his son felt like an impossible leap. The next morning, Maya found Walter sitting at his kitchen table with the phone number written on a piece of paper in front of him. He had obviously been staring at it for a while. "I don't know what to say," Walter admitted when Maya sat down next to him. It's been 3 years since we talked. How do you start a conversation after 3 years? Maybe you start with the truth, Maya suggested. Maybe you tell him you miss him and you're proud of everything he's accomplished. Walter nodded slowly, but Maya could see his hands shaking again. She realized that making this phone call might be one of the hardest things Walter had ever had to do. Would it help if I was here when you called? Maya asked. Walter looked at her with such gratitude that Maya felt her own eyes start to water. Would you mind? Of course not. Maya sat next to Walter as he dialed the number with trembling fingers. She could hear the phone ringing through the receiver, and she saw Walter's grip tighten on the phone with each ring. Chen Technologies. This is David Chen's office, came a professional voice through the phone. Walter's voice caught in his throat. For a moment, Maya thought he was going to hang up. Hello, Walter finally managed. This is Walter Chen. I'm calling for David. I'm his father. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Maya held her breath. Oh my goodness, the voice said, suddenly much warmer. Mr. Chen, David has been hoping you would call. Please hold on one moment while I get him for you. Walter looked at Maya with wide eyes as they waited. Maya squeezed his hand and whispered, He's been hoping you would call. And then they heard a voice that Walter hadn't heard in 3 years. Dad? Walter's face crumpled with emotion, and Maya knew that everything was about to change. The word Dad hung in the air like a bridge being built between two distant shores. Maya watched Walter's face transform as he heard his son's voice for the first time in 3 years. Tears were streaming down the old man's cheeks, but for the first time since Maya had known him, they looked like tears of joy. David, Walter managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. I wasn't sure you'd want to talk to me. Dad, I've been waiting for this call for years. David's voice came through the phone, and Maya could hear that he was crying too. I've picked up the phone to call you 100 times, but I never knew what to say. I'm sorry, Walter said immediately. David, I'm so sorry for everything. For not believing in you, for not supporting your dreams, for being too proud to admit when I was wrong. Dad, stop, David said gently. We both made mistakes. I should have tried harder to stay in touch. I should have called more after Mom died. I thought you were disappointed in me for dropping out of school. Walter laughed through his tears. Disappointed? David, I just spent the evening reading about everything you've accomplished. You've built something incredible. You've helped so many people. Your mother would be so proud of you. I built it for her, David said softly. And for you, Dad. Everything I learned about solving problems, about not giving up when things get hard, I learned from watching you work in your garage when I was little. Maya quietly stood up to give Walter some privacy, but he grabbed her hand and shook his head. He wanted her to stay. David, Walter said, there's someone here I want you to know about. A young woman named Maya who, well, she's the reason I finally had the courage to call you. Maya felt her cheeks burn as Walter explained how she had helped him, how she had researched David online, and how she had convinced him to make this call. She could hear David asking questions about her, thanking her for taking care of his father. Dad, David said after Walter finished, I want to come see you. Can I fly out this weekend? Walter looked at Maya with panic in his eyes. David, you don't need to drop everything for me. I know you're busy with important things. Dad, there is nothing more important than this. I'm getting on a plane tomorrow. After they hung up, Walter sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Maya made him some tea and sat with him as he processed what had just happened. He's coming here, Walter said as if he couldn't quite believe it. Tomorrow? How do you feel? Maya asked, terrified, Walter admitted. What if we can't figure out how to talk to each other in person? What if it's too awkward after all these years? Walter, you just had a beautiful conversation with him on the phone. It won't be awkward. It'll be wonderful. The next day, Maya helped Walter clean his apartment from top to bottom. Walter was nervous energy personified, reorganizing the same shelf 3 times and changing his shirt twice before David's plane was supposed to land. What if he thinks this place is too small? Walter worried as he straightened a picture frame. What if he's embarrassed by how I live? Walter, David grew up here with you and Helen, Maya reminded him. This isn't about the apartment. This is about family. David had texted Walter the address of his hotel and said he would come over around dinner time. As the afternoon wore on, Walter became more and more anxious. Maya stayed with him, helping him cook Helen's famous pot roast recipe and listening to him practice things he wanted to say to David. At exactly 6 o'clock, there was a knock on the door. Walter froze. Maya gently squeezed his shoulder and said, "Go answer it. Your son is here." Walter opened the door and Maya saw a man who looked exactly like the photos she had seen online, but with Walter's eyes and Helen's smile. For a moment, father and son just stared at each other. Then David stepped forward and wrapped Walter in the biggest hug Maya had ever seen. They held each other for a long time, both of them crying openly. Maya felt her own tears starting as she watched 3 years of pain and regret melt away in that one embrace. "You look good, Dad," David said when they finally separated. "Older but good." "You look successful," Walter replied, taking in David's expensive clothes and confident bearing. "But you still have your mother's smile." David looked around the apartment, and Maya saw his expression change as he took in the modest furniture and the careful way everything was arranged to make the most of a small space. "Dad," David said gently, "are you okay here? I mean financially?" Walter looked embarrassed. "I get by. Social Security and a small pension. It's enough. Dad, you know I can help you, right? You know I want to help you?" "David, I don't want your money," Walter said quickly. "I don't want you to think I called because I found out about your success." David sat down heavily on Walter's old couch. "Dad, money isn't what matters here. What matters is that I've missed 3 years of your life. I don't know what you've been doing, who you've been talking to, what you've been thinking about. I don't know if you've been lonely or sick or happy or sad." That's when Walter introduced Maya properly, explaining how she had become like family to him over the past few months. David turned to Maya with an expression of such genuine gratitude that it took her breath away. "Maya," David said, "I don't know how to thank you for taking care of my father, for being there when I wasn't." "You don't need to thank me," Maya said. "Walter has been taking care of me too. We take care of each other." David spent the evening asking Walter about everything he had missed. He wanted to know about Walter's health, his daily routine, his friends, his hobbies. He asked about Helen's last months and how Walter had coped with losing her. Most importantly, he listened. As the evening went on, Maya watched the awkwardness fade away as father and son remembered how to be comfortable with each other. They talked about engineering, about David's company, about Helen's memory, and about the future. "Dad," David said as the evening was winding down, "I want you to come to California. Not to visit, to live. I have a house with plenty of space and there are amazing senior communities nearby where you could have your independence, but also have people around." Walter hesitated. "David, I appreciate the offer, but this is my home, and I can't leave Maya." David looked at Maya thoughtfully. "Maya, what are your plans after nursing school?" Maya explained that she still had 2 years left in her program and hoped to work in a hospital after graduation, preferably somewhere she could help people who needed care the most. "What if I told you I could arrange for you to finish your degree at one of the best nursing programs in California with a full scholarship? And what if I told you that my foundation is always looking for compassionate nurses to help with our senior care initiatives?" Maya stared at David in shock. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. Maya, you saved my relationship with my father. You gave me back the most important thing in my life. This is the least I can do." 3 months later, Maya stood in the driveway of David's beautiful house in California, helping Walter out of the car that had picked them up from the airport. Walter had decided to try living near David for a while, and Maya had accepted the scholarship to finish her nursing degree at a prestigious university nearby. As they walked up to David's front door, Walter took Maya's hand. "You know," he said with a smile, "Helen always said that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose, not the ones you're born into." Maya squeezed his hand back. "She sounds like she was a very wise woman." "She was," Walter agreed. "And I think she would have loved this story." David opened the front door with a huge grin. "Welcome home," he said. And for the first time in years, Maya, Walter, and David all felt like they truly were home.